Welcome to the Truth in Love podcast with your host, Kimberly Faith, and my dad, John Mack. We seek to present God's timeless truth through the lens of His remarkable love. Welcome back to the Truth in Love podcast, and we are in the middle of our Gifts of Christmas series, and I'm especially excited about today because I have story time with Mom and Dad today. John and Lynn McLarty are back. And of course, you know, Dad's become the co-host, so I don't know what I'm even saying right now.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this story time.
Mom, are you looking forward to telling us stories today?
Yes, I am.
Oh, I'm so glad, because you guys tell the best stories, mostly because they're real. So just by way of introducing everyone to what we're going to talk about today, some of the best gifts of Christmas we've been sharing on the podcast have been stories of how love was given and shared that have changed people's lives. And along those lines, you all fostered over 100 kids in Arkansas. Now, I don't know. I'm very interested to hear how that all started. So, Mom, would you want to lead us off?
Okay. Well, it started with, I think, something the Lord planted in my heart. It started with something the Lord planted in my heart after we were saved in 1975. I had a burden for children, and I actually wanted to start an orphanage. I actually had no idea what that meant, and how overwhelming that would be actually to start an orphanage.
Wait, Dad, what did you think of when you heard about this orphanage?
Well, this is really interesting because Lynn would say that. And when Lynn says that she has such a heart, when she says she'd like to start an orphanage, she thinks of all these little children's faces. Mm-hmm. And she would I would say, float the idea to me. And I would say something like, well, that's something we should pray about, darling. But I'm visioning this huge facility, this huge, 12-bedroom
institution,
right. And, the property we would need, and just the logistics and the type of kitchen you would need, and bedrooms and management. So I would go that's something really to pray about, isn't it, darling?
So with that in mind, I kind of kept it in my heart, mm-hmm. because I could tell that this sounded overwhelming to my husband. But years later, the Lord had a plan, because He put that
Amen.
In my heart.
That's true.
And there was a guardian ad litem, which he was guardian ad litem for foster children.
Now, I want to this was Lavenski Smith, right?
This is Lavenski Smith.
So just a side note about Lavenski. Lavenski and I were in law school at the same time. And we'd always joke, because we were also both janitors at Harmony, which was Dad's company, Dad and Johnny Tittle's company. So we worked our way through law school working as janitors. And we would joke that we were going to start a law firm together. And then now he's serving on the 8th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. He served on the Arkansas Supreme Court. So
amazing.
Clearly the Lord had amazing plans for this very humble Baptist preacher who is now, in such an influential position. But anyway, Lavenski came to you about this child he represented.
Yes. She was a teenager, and she was about to be dismissed from an institution, and she needed a place to go. So
can I answer something? Actually, Taunya came to us. She had befriended this girl.
So Tanya's my sister, your daughter.
Yes.
She was also a lawyer in Houston, Texas.
She's a lawyer. So,
Sorry,
but Taunya was just in law school at the time, and Lavenski had brought this girl to church, and they had befriended each other. Mm-hmm. So when Taunya heard about this situation, that this girl needed a shift in homes, she said, Mom and Dad, can we bring Beth in? I guess we can use her first name.
Sure, she's an adult now.
We can bring Beth. Can we bring Beth in? And we said, well, sure. And Taunya said, well, Vince is involved. He's her guardian ad litem, so you need to go talk to Vince. So anyway.
And that's why you had to become foster parents?
Yeah, so that's...
Yeah,
so we went to talk to Vince. But it was Tanya's reaching out to Beth that started it.
Yes, and so we had to become foster parents. So we thought, well, okay. So when we went through all these classes, and then when this guy came to certify us and check our home out, we had moved into this big rental house, and
right on the edge of the University.
Right near the university, because all our kids were coming back home and wanting to live there to go to college. So we thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to have another child living here. We have a big bunch of bedrooms.
Just make a little more oatmeal.
So when the guy came to certify us for Beth Lynn to move in, he said, well, I'll certify you for 5. And I said,
5 kids?
5 what? And he said, 5 children. And we said, oh, no. We just want this one child. We have all our kids are moving back home. And one of our daughters brought home a Chinese lady and another friend of hers. So we had extra friends living there. And then our 3 college students living there. And so we said, oh, no, you'll never have that many. He said, I'm just going to certify you for 5.
Gary.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we said, well, okay. And,
but we don't want any babies.
But we don't want any babies.
No children in diapers.
No diapers.
We're done with diapers.
So anyway, make a long story short, the next thing we know, we're getting a phone call on a weekend saying
from Gary,
the guy who said we would not have 5 children. And Beth Lynn was living with us now. And he said, would you mind taking an 18-month-old little boy? And we said, oh, Gary, we told you no babies and no diapers. And he says, I guess I'll have to stay in the office all weekend with this baby because I can't take him home with me. And we said, oh, okay, Gary, well, we'll take him for the weekend, but that's it. He says, yeah, Monday, he said, we'll have another home for the little boy. So here we are at home, and he brings this little boy, and I had made a big pot of split pea soup. We're sitting at the table, getting ready to eat, and here comes 18-month-old Stephen with his big dimples. He was so cute.
He was so cute.
And
his big green eyes. So he comes and sits down at the table with us, sits on my lap, and I'm sitting next to my husband. And we're eating this split pea soup, and Stephen wasn't having anything to do with that split pea soup. And so John, my husband, goes to take a spoonful, and Stephen's looking at it, and all of a sudden he decided he liked John's split pea soup. So
I fed him. I thought, I'll see if he'll eat this.
Yeah.
And he ate from my spoon.
Uh-huh.
But that kind of, touched my heart.
Right.
I thought, well, he'll take split pea soup from me, but he won't eat it on his own or from Lynn. So it kind of made me feel special.
Isn't that funny the way? And what you just said is so interesting, because in an earlier podcast a couple of weeks ago, where I interviewed the Stahl Cups, one of the themes of that interview was about how foster care adoption is a trifecta or trilateral blessing, because it's a blessing obviously to the children, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also this blessing to the people who are taking these children in and getting to experience just this pure love from a child who just has been neglected or abused or rejected and doesn't. I mean, I'm sure Stephen's mind, he's looking at you going, this is a male, this is a man, and identify it because he never had that in his life.
Yeah, and at the time I didn't think of that, but
right.
That's probably all true. But I just felt like, oh, I have a little bond with this little boy,
right.
And it made me feel good. Like,
right. And it's the way God made us.
We got this little thing going here.
Right. I just think this is adoption and foster care is such a look into the heart of God, because I imagine that when we when we turn towards God as his adopted children, when we're adopted through the gift of salvation, that he feels a special delight in that we can't even comprehend. But we get a little picture of that through this process of interacting with children who are so desperately in need.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry. I just thought of that.
Right.
Yeah, no. So by the end of the weekend, were you ready to give him back?
So we, by the end of that meal, we were like, well, we're not sure we want to give this little guy back. So we were actually couldn't wait till Monday morning at 8:00 when Gary got to the office. We thought we need to call him first thing before he starts calling other people. And so we called Gary up and we said, Gary, we just want to keep him. And so, of course, he probably thought, just give him the weekend and that would be it. They won't want to give him back. Mm-hmm. So he was very pleased. And so we of course, we weren't prepared for a little baby. So we got this little, I forget what it was. At the end of our bed, we put a box or something. I'm not sure.
A nest.
a little nest at the end of the bed. And so here's little Stephen in the little bed, and we're trying to sleep. And so I don't know what time it was. We hear him calling us. I forget.
Oh, this is funny.
So what did he call us, honey? Mom, Dad?
He would go, Mom. We were trying to get to sleep, so we ignored him. He'd go, Dad. So we ignored him. Then he said, John. We ignored him. He said, Lynn. We ignored that. Then he said, Babe. And that's what we call each other affectionately. Like, hey, babe, what, we're just, and that got us. When he went through all the possible names. And when he said, babe, and we thought, okay, Stephen. We brought him up.
Snuggled him
in our bed, snuggled him. It's okay. You figured out our name.
That is so funny. So what did Gary say when you called him Monday morning?
Well, he was, I think he was expecting us to call him and change our mind. And he was very happy.
He knew how things worked.
Yeah. He was very happy that we changed our mind. And from that point on, we got babies and we didn't reject them. We just took in babies. We took in all ages.
And I've got to do it, by the way. The intent of foster care is to reunite the families. Mm-hmm. And as we tell this story, that's mainly what happens. Mm-hmm. Of the 100 children that we had, most of them go back. They've fixed or tried to fix the problem in the family so they can reunite the families. And that was our goal. That's always the goal. Stephen we adopted him.
Right.
And that was not our, we didn't go into foster care to adopt.
Right.
We were just wanting to help out this one girl.
Right.
But Stephen, a couple of years later, after reunification efforts didn't work out, maybe it's 2 or 3 years later, we ended up adopting him. And he's still our dimple-faced little boy today. Except he's great big.
He's great big. He has a big scruffy Viking look. He has lots of tattoos, but those dimples, they're still there, and he can't hide them. And even it's actually he's delightful. He really is. I can't even imagine our life without Stephen. And so. From Stephen, we mentioned at the very beginning that you fostered over 100 kids. First of all, I want to ask a question because our listeners, I think, at least, I work in the foster care system we have our Foster Kids Boutique, which will be our next podcast will be about that. And, I do a lot of adoptions and guardianships in the foster care system. And I think there's this perception by people who watch our Facebook page and stuff that most foster parents are in their 20s. Mm-hmm. So what age were you all when you started doing foster care?
We were in our 40s.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you were starting over because,
and again, see, that wasn't our intent. All of our kids were in college or graduating from college.
Right. Yeah, I was in law school.
We were kind of thinking, should we downsize our house and planned more traveling, and God had a very different plan for us.
So when you began fostering, you eventually became foster parent trainers, right?
Foster parent and adoptive parent trainers.
Okay.
And we would actually be the ones going out to the house and making sure everything's good. And, the foster parents are, meet all the requirements.
Right. It's funny, and I think it was the second podcast that you all talked about the foundation for a satisfying life. You had kind of recounted your story about how you never set out to do this career or that career, but the Lord had guided you through the various careers. Was this one of them?
This was very interesting. Yes, it was. After 2 or 3 years of foster care, we had just made relationships in Department of Human Services, not only on the local level, but the foster parents go to Little Rock once a year, and they have kind of a foster parent conference, and it's just a luncheon and a thank you type thing. So we met the state foster care, the DHS people, and just built relationships with them. Well, at some time in the mid-'90s, the state of Arkansas decided to do this private sector thing and let out the recruiting and training and opening homes of foster and adoptive parents into the private sector.
Interesting.
So we thought, actually, we didn't even think about it. This lady named Carolyn Reynolds came to us, said, John and Lynn, y'all should do this. Y'all would be great at this. So we said, well, we don't know anything about it. And she says, well, just think about it and try to make it happen. So we looked at the contract, and you needed somebody professional on your team with college, the qualifications. Well, we were going to church with Vince Smith, guardian ad litem, attorney, and his wife was Trindle, social worker.
Oh, wow.
So we thought, we've got the dream team. We've got the credentials,
right?
A guardian ad litem lawyer, and we have a social worker, and then we're the boots on the ground foster parents in the trenches. So we formed a company called Partners for Family Training and applied for the contract and got it to recruit and train foster parents in the 4 counties of Northwest Arkansas. So it became kind of a career thing because we were being, contracted with the state, and we went all over Carroll County, Madison County, put ads in papers, recruited people, and it was just wonderful. Just training, meeting people, having these big sessions and teaching them, going through the training, doing the criminal background checks, opening the home, doing the home studies. And,
wow. And so were you doing that while you were foster parents?
Yes. Yes.
And
so we would tell, our sessions it was really great. It was a great thing the state did. Because in our sessions, Vince would get up and give the legal side. Trindle would get up and talk about the social worker side. And we would get up and tell real life stories.
And we'd bring Stephen with us with his little dimples.
Because he was
our show and tell.
Our show and tell.
Oh, gosh. Well,
but we would say, this isn't just a piece of cake. You're going to have some sleepless nights. You're going to get calls from DHS on Friday late, and something's happened and they need to place 3 kids. And then most of these kids go back home and you've been attached to them. So you're going to cry and miss them. And, so we were very transparent in our sessions.
I just think about, what you're saying, how, what a dream team this was, because you did have all the technical, and then the boots on the ground was it. I don't mean to say it was such a selling point, but you had Exhibit A, Stephen, then you had the boots on the ground experience. You had your own, walk, your own journey. And what a great parallel that is to the Great Commission. Christ, when we receive the gift of salvation, and we are born again. We're a new creature in Christ. And then Jesus said we're to engage in discipleship. Go ye therefore and make disciples. Well, you can't make disciples if, number one, you're not one yourself. And number two, you can't teach people how to make disciples if you're not doing it yourself. And the credibility that adds to the persuasion or the art of making disciples, for lack of a better term, because when you have, the Beatitudes of Christ, right, that he talked about, and you have the fruit of the Spirit flowing from you, and then you have the truth because you've done the training in God's Word, you become this incredibly credible source of carrying out the Great Commission of Christ. And that's what you did with foster care.
And productive. So just to kind of wrap that up, so we were very productive. We opened more homes per year than, bless their hearts, DHS ever did. Because we were very successful, and it would draw people. And so we opened, I think, 40 homes a year.
Wow. For
3 years. And then what happened is, I think the rest of the state wasn't experiencing the same level of success as we were in Northwest Arkansas. So they shut the program down. We don't know that the rest of the state was as successful.
Right.
So, or it could be just, a bureaucratic thing, like, well, this was fine, but we want to bring it back in-house.
Sure.
So, but it was our career kind of we had A+ going on our mini storage on the side.
Right.
But it was very involved. Very satisfying, actually.
So can you kind of tell everybody then how, so we have Stephen was adopted a couple of years later, and then there's Hannah, Michael, and Jeremiah, who were also foster children. Can you kind of tell the story about how they came into the family?
Yes, well, I think I was out shopping, and my husband was at home, and he got the call. There's this little infant, 9 days old, premature, tiny little baby.
How much does she weigh?
Oh, about 3.5 pounds, something like that. I don't remember the exact weight. And could you take her? And of course, John said yes.
I didn't even call Lynn. I just said yes.
He just said yes. So I get home with more groceries than I ever bought in my whole life. And so I filled the whole kitchen floor with bags of groceries. And John said, honey, you better sit down. And so I sat down and I thought, what is going on? I need to put these groceries away. He said, honey, we've got this little 9-day-old premature baby coming here in about 30 minutes. And I went, oh my goodness. And so I got the groceries put away, and they brought in this little tiny, precious little baby that you just hold in one hand.
It was Hannah.
Hannah. She was 9 days old. And, of course, we just fell in love with her. And it was kind of around that same time we were trying to decide whether to kind of downsize a little bit.
Meaning foster.
In foster care, or
our homes, the size of our home.
The size of our home, or
we were just renting that house.
Just, we had all these kids that really needed space. That we were living in a neighborhood, and we had a nice home, but it was, I don't know, I just felt like they needed a place to just run and play and not have to worry about neighbors and
cars on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, here's little Hannah, and we just fell in love with her. And we thought, man, I just can't imagine losing her. And then after that, we got a call for one of her brothers that was in another home, and they were actually having to not be foster parents anymore. And so they asked us if we would take her brother, and we did, of course. There was one other little boy that was still with his dad, I believe. And when we would go to little visits at DHS, there was this little guy that would just run crazy around
No, that was
DHS.
Michael, right?
That was Michael.
Hannah and Jeremiah's brother.
Yeah, Michael.
So Hannah and Jeremiah were in the home.
We're in the home
home.
now.
We would go visit. Yeah.
We'd go visit at the DHS, and there'd be this wild little child that was running crazy. And his language was about the same. Spicy. And so at the time, I was thinking our house was filled. We didn't have just Jeremiah and Hannah. We had 5 or 6 kids. And so they called us, and I remember thinking, well, I hope these parents get it together. I don't know if I could handle this little guy. But, of course, that didn't happen, and we got a call. Could we take Michael? And we said sure. And
Keep
then
the sibling group together.
Yeah, keep all the kids together. And then I remember when Michael came, he would call me a name. I guess I can say this on this recording. Call me a butthead. And I took him out on the little back porch, and I said, Michael, we don't use that word in our home. We don't use the word but. And so then when he'd get mad at me, he'd say, you head. And so, of course, we'd laugh. And so anyways, to make a long story short, we decided not to downsize. We decided to get this 5 acres and build a log home and have a place for these kids. And, we didn't know how long we were going to continue to be foster parents. But so all these children came up for adoption. We had just adopted Stephen, and Hannah, Michael, and Jeremiah came up for adoption. And, of course, we were already in love with them.
They were pretty lovable.
Absolutely.
So we adopted them, and we continued to be in foster parents for a little while, but we felt like at that point that we needed to kind of protect these children, nurture them, and
Or not have their life so disrupted.
not have
In and
more
out.
of a calm life. Yeah. So,
And you at this point, you guys, you were in your 50s when Hannah was adopted.
yes.
Yeah, and I mentioned that not to be like disclosing ages or anything, but just to our audience needs to know that God's love doesn't have a limitation by age or socioeconomic.
Right.
I mean, you didn't have a lot of assets.
No.
You didn't have you opened up your home, every corner of your home, and I remember, just from my perspective as an adult seeing this, how you'd have to put locks on some doors because you had kids who would just steal and kids who would invade your privacy to the nth degree. Mm-hmm. But in my heart, in my mind, every time I would come around and see y'all, I would think about this, the verse out of Psalms 68 where David talks about God being a father of the fatherless, a defender of widows. This is God in his holy habitation. And there's this one phrase where it says, God sets the solitary in families. I think about these.
That's a great verse.
It is such a great verse. And I think about like Hannah at 9 days old, so vulnerable, and she struck gold when she came into your home,
So
and you
we.
did too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think about how, now today, here she is, she's working in our Go Faith Strong ministry, and how God he just had this journey planned for her. And I love that what the psalmist says about how God knows he's written a plan for us. Every one of our days are written down before we were formed in our mother's womb. And your story is such a picture of that. How, Michael, Stephen, Jeremiah, Hannah, even Dad, the fact that you adopted, Taunya, Thomas, and I, when you were just in your 20s. And, It's like, who does that?
I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I'm glad I did it.
But here we are today, right? Who would have thunk? And I think about, weren't you all fostering also, Dad, when you decided to go back to undergraduate school?
Yes.
Yes.
You were building a house, this cabin.
Yes.
You were fostering, and you were a full-time student at the University of Arkansas.
Well, one funny story, when we first got Hannah, Lynn had to go away for 3 days, and it was my first semester. So I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to catch up on all of my homework. This is going to be, I'll just have this little baby to take care of, and I'll get all caught up and do some house projects. Oh my goodness. Lynn left me 24 bottles and Hannah. I said, I can take care of it. No problem. Well, did I get an education on motherhood that you feed the baby and then you rock the baby when they're crying, you change the diapers. And when the baby goes to sleep, that's your only opportunity to go to sleep. So it was wonderful, though. But all I did was take care of Hannah. I got no homework done.
And I came home with 24 dirty bottles in the sink.
And a happy baby.
And a happy
and
baby.
And a tired dad.
A dad happy to see Lynn back.
Well, I love that you all are, I know you probably have more stories. Like last night we were talking about, what was the girl we were talking about last night that,
Jaquita.
And just how funny she was, you know. She called you, what'd she call you, John?
Yeah. She said, that's right, John.
We
had so many. Yes, the Lord blessed us with 4 children that just enriched our life and became available for adoption. Mm-hmm. But in foster care, the intent is to, have them go back home. So the typical stay is 3 to 6 months.
Right.
But so we met the most amazing array of children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And had great times, and Jaquita, and I could just, go on, but just wonderful experiences, and sad when, you see them,
Can I tell one story?
Sure.
We got this little baby, and she was called a failure to thrive. So a failure to thrive baby, when you're feeding them, they won't look in your eyes. Mm. They just look away. And so when we got her, that's how she was when I'd feed her. So we actually changed our sleeping arrangements. I moved downstairs into a bedroom, and I'd just sleep with Haley Renee, trying to bond with her. And by the time DHS called us and it was time for her to go back, it was like within a couple weeks. And this was like the hardest thing I ever had to do. That morning was the first time she looked into my eyes when I was feeding her.
Oh.
So she started to bond. And her mother actually sent me a thank you note.
Oh.
And so it was kind of a special time. And but, we experienced getting her to the point where she was bonding.
Right.
And maybe that her mother, had time to kind of get her life together, and she went back to be with her mom.
Love is never wasted. It's never wasted.
That's so true.
We have to really,
true.
And we think about this, and I just think about all the children you were able to touch, and I know that some of them you actually got to lead to Christ, to be born again, to have received the gift of salvation, and probably every child that came into your home who was old enough to understand and communicate, heard the gospel. Because you took them to church, you had this great mission field, and this Truth and Love podcast is the story you're telling is exactly what we as adults need to comprehend through your stories, is that when you are loving people, that is the best platform for giving them the truth. And you had this whole vulnerable population that you were able to influence and plant the seeds, even if they didn't receive Jesus Christ as their Savior. You planted seeds, the seeds of the gospel that will never leave. They'll never be able to get that out. They will always have that, and the Holy Spirit will continue to work in them. And you know, I'm sure there's still children you pray for, which is super powerful.
We do, and we have relationships with several of them.
That's
that
wonderful.
We have phone calls with, and even reconnected a couple of some of the twins. We reconnected with them, and they came by. And
I think about, when I think about your life and the foster care system in general, and the people like you and Mom and the Stall Cups, people that I know. I have other friends that are amazing Christians who have taken this as their mission. I think about what Jesus said. He said, you know, in Matthew chapter 18, he said, unless you are converted and become as little children. He talked about humbling ourselves as a child. The only way you can love a child with kind of the love that God gives us is if you have first come to Christ with the heart of full surrender, full trust, full acknowledgement that there's, you know, kind of like the beatitude we talked about, with poor in spirit, you know, and knowing that you are nothing, you have nothing except God. That's when you know you have all you need. And these children, you were able to love them like God loves you, because you do come to Christ. You do come to God as a child for all that you need. And then these children could come to you because they could sense, you know, that they could trust this baby that you just talked about. She probably couldn't even talk yet, right? But she knew she had the ability to understand love, because we're born with the knowledge of God. And it's just so beautiful how the lessons that Jesus teaches us are full circle in what you've done in your foster care. So I hate to end this podcast because it's so good, but I just want to give you both the opportunity to share with our listeners anything that you think would be encouraging. This is Christmas. These are gifts of Christmas, the best gifts of Christmas. So what else, in closing, would you like to share with our listeners?
I would just say that God gets all the credit, and that this whole experience, this part of our life, blessed us. And we were used to help others, but it was a greater blessing to us. And we ended up with Stephen and Jeremiah and Michael and Hannah. And that's just an eternal blessing.
Absolutely. Mom, do you have any last words for us?
Well, just some of the memories that are always going to be in our hearts. Seeing a little girl in the Walmart dressing room, putting on a little petticoat and twirling around and saying she looked beautiful.
Oh.
And the little girl I taught to read, that was way past the age of learning to read, taught her phonics and taught her how to read, and seeing the excitement in her eyes. There's just blessings that you'll never forget.
Those are eternal blessings, and that's why I think that in sharing these stories, I just want what people are hearing to inspire them to continue this gift of love, that the kind of love that it always comes back to bless you, and it will for eternity.
Yeah.
It's an eternal gift. The gift of love.
True.
So thank you both for opening your hearts and your homes and sharing just what the Lord did through fostering in your lives. And you've been listening to the Truth and Love podcast, and I'm so glad that you joined us. And we're continuing this series on the best gifts of Christmas. And next week, you're going to hear from Joy Hinkle, our executive director at our Fostering by Faith boutique. I guarantee you the stories that she is going to tell about the foster children who come into our foster kids boutique and shop are going to touch you. And this will be our Christmas Eve podcast, so I hope you'll join us. You have been listening to the Truth and Love podcast with your host, Kimberly Faith. To discover more answers to the big questions in life, visit us at gofaithstrong.com.